get started? Oh, you need to log in. That didn't mean we were going to get started. He's the one who's getting started, not me. He's in charge, even though I gave the thumbs up. So we'll get started as soon as Adriano's ready.
You're logged in?
Okay.
What? You forgot your password? Really?
Grazie mille a tutti di essere venuti. Questo panel non sarà in italiano. Thank you very much all for coming. So it's a pleasure to be here, and we're going to talk about media startups. We're going to talk about how to raise money for a media startup. We're going to talk about how to get resources in general for people who want to create something new, who want to shake up the status quo, who want to disrupt things, and who want to create new models for the journalism that we need, for the journalism that we love. And in a place like Perugia, where everything is to be loved, from the gelato to the cafe, I think that it cannot be a better place. So I'm so happy to be here. My name is Adriano Farano. I'm originally not from Norway or the US. I'm actually Italian. I come from the Amalfi Coast, from Cava dei Tirreni, and I'm a startup entrepreneur. And I'm so happy to be joined here by my friends with whom I share another geographic area that is not too bad, the Silicon Valley area, the Bay Area. I have Jim Louderback, who's an entrepreneur, a CEO, investor, and many other things that he's going to tell you all about. And I have Djordje Padejski, who's with the GSK Stanford Journalism Fellowship, one of the best journalism fellowships in the world, and who's also a media innovator, a creator of the FOIA machine. So the way we're going to structure this panel is that we're going to start by telling you a little bit about ourselves and what we built, because we're all kind of builders of stuff. And then we are, each of us, going to tell you a little bit about what we think where innovation is today. As you know, there are a lot of companies out there that aren't startups anymore, that did start as startups though, and did start out of garages or dorm rooms, etc., and ended up being in Congress, grilled by a commission, which is like actually one of the greatest achievements you can get to with a startup, because it means that you're actually onto something, good and bad.
You mean good for Congress or for the startup?
Exactly. So we're going to talk about that, and we are also going to take questions and even pitches. If you have your idea, you want to know from people like us who have either built companies or who have sold companies or invested in companies, what we think of it, and if we have tips or advice, we'll be happy to share. So why don't we start with you, Jim?
So Jim Louderback. My background, I went to school for computers and technology and learned how to code. I fell into media, which means I started writing about stuff I was doing, and I took a job at a newspaper, a computer technology newspaper in the US, writing about technology, and I don't know anything about journalism. Ended up being editor-in-chief of PC Magazine and PC Week and Windows Sources and some of the top technology magazines in the US. And then I ended up falling into television. We launched a cable network about technology called Tech TV in 1998. And that was great for a few years. The internet started disrupting all this stuff, so I spent more time doing media on the internet, and as it turned out, did my first startup. Tech TV was an internal startup at a larger company. The first startup, a small company, online video startup in the early days, about the time when YouTube started a company called Revision 3, which we built up trying to capture some of that. Let's do video about technology and video games and news and things like that. And we eventually built it up into what we call a multi-channel network. And folks like the Young Turks and the Fine Brothers were part of our network, and sold that to Discovery Networks, where I went from running a small startup, venture-backed, built it up, sold it, everybody did okay, and nobody got rich. Ended up back in the big media company again for a couple years till I couldn't take it anymore. Went back and started working at an online video event startup called VidCon. We do events about, started by a couple of YouTube creators. They brought me in to first help them with the content and then to run the whole thing. And we do events around the world about online video, where we get the fans together of online video and the business around online video. It's called VidCon, and big in the US. We're about to do our 9th one, 30,000 people there, but we also finished our 2nd one in Europe, and we're doing our 2nd one in Australia in a couple of weeks. A couple months. And then just recently in the last 2 months, I sold that company to Viacom. So I am now back in the throes and the embrace of the large media company again. And we'll see what happens, but I'm super happy to be there. So in the meantime, in that middle area between after I left Discovery and before I ended up getting to Viacom, I worked as a venture capitalist for a couple of years at a seed fund in the Bay Area, where I invested in we invested in about 50 companies a year, and I did a bunch of work investing in various different types of media companies and thinking about media and the future of media. So that's me. You don't want me to, you're going to move on and we'll talk about where innovation is today next, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm done then.
Cool. So me, as you heard, I come from Stanford University. It's a John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships program where we bring 18 to 20 journalists every year to Stanford to work on a journalism question, problem, challenge, and many of them are starting companies, creating tools, but also creating organizations and sort of like finding different ways to tackle the sort of like the pressing problem, the most important problems that we have in journalism now, and we also have so our focus is really innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership, and we also work through several topics. But before I tell you about like this whole thing, and many of our alumni are here in this room. Thank you guys for being here. I also want to tell you that in my previous life, I'm originally from Serbia. I worked there as an investigative reporter almost like 16 years and been sort of creating stuff over there. And I would never, when we were thinking about this panel, we named it like media entrepreneurship. I actually never thought about myself as an entrepreneur. And because I always thought like, no, I'm a journalist, right? Like I'm doing this thing because I believe in journalism. I'm passionate about. I started my career during the Milosevic regime, so I never ever thought that I'm going to be doing things. And what I also learned in the meantime that this is actually very connected. The entrepreneurship and the whole idea of creating and doing something new and innovative is very connected with journalism. And I'll tell you more about it, what I think. But it's sort of like makes you active. And so later on I basically started several things. I started the Center for Investigative Reporting in Serbia, which was one of the first investigative nonprofits sort of like covering hardcore political corruption over there, and had to learn all these different things. Because first of all, I just wanted to do journalism, but I had to make room for journalism, and then needed to learn how to fundraise, how to write grants, and all bunch of crap that I taught at that time. But like those are the things that you need to learn. And later on, when I moved to US, I've been sort of like really exploring these ideas and how do we help journalism thrive. So I've been creating journalism tools, and one of them is, as Adriano mentioned, is FOIA machine. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But like I really sort of like learned that that what made me sort of like think about how do we change journalism. It is really one of the answers is this entrepreneurial mindset, and that we share that a lot. Either you want to start a for-profit company like Adriano did. Now he's focused on something a little bit different. That these things are making us move and change. And this panel today is really pitched to you guys all that think about yourself as entrepreneur.
Yeah, even if you're starting a new project within an existing news
organization. There's even a name for that.
It's like an intrapreneur. Aren't those names terrible?
Have you heard about it? Yeah. Intrapreneur is a person who has entrepreneurial mindset and it's trying to change organization from inside.
The truth of the matter, and I'll get into my background in a second, is that journalism is going through so much change that if we just want to preserve the status quo and not change anything, we're not going to be...
We're going to fail.
Yeah. Exactly.
We're going to fail.
Exactly. Yeah. So one way or the other, we need to change. Okay, so quickly about my background. So I started my love for journalism age 9. I was sitting on the couch with my parents. It was 1989, and I was watching the first newscast, telegiornale, that I can remember. And there were all those people chanting in Berlin because the wall had come down. And I was so inspired by that journalist was there witnessing history that the 9 years old in me, told my parents, one day I want to become a journalist. The next day I went to school and realized that I actually was about to become an entrepreneur. Why? Because I talked to my friends and realized that they didn't know what had happened in Berlin. So I was like, okay, I think it's a problem. I think we should fix that. So I got back home and started scribbling a small newspaper that I called the Giornalino di Berlino, and I photocopied it. My dad had a photocopy machine, which was probably like today you have a drone or something like that. And I went back to school and sold it for 500 lira a copy, and it was sold out. So I was like, wow, so there might be a model here. But here's the catch. I did it as a clandestine operation because I knew that the Catholic teacher would label me as a sinner. And that's what happened. She actually caught me after 3 or 4 numbers, and she was about to kick me out of school for that. In the US, you'd have probably gotten a medal.
Right.
She was like, you cannot make money in school. So that's how I got started, and which probably also gave me a sort of a sense that at some point in my career, sooner or later, I should leave this country, which happened actually pretty soon with my first company, although it was a non-profit. It was called Café Babel. Café Babel. Café Babel was still is a pan-European multilingual online magazine entirely translated in 6 languages with an army of volunteers with the goal of creating a public opinion that transcends national frontiers and borders in Europe. It just turned 18 years old, which for the internet is like dog's ears. So then I got this wonderful fellowship at Stanford 7 years ago. After the fellowship, I started a for-profit startup company called WatchUp, which was a streaming news service, which we sold a year and a half ago to a streaming company called Plex. And I had an amazing time at Plex. We recently released Plex News, which is great when you sell a company to a bigger company to see growing your baby into something much more mature. And a few weeks ago, I resigned to start yet another company. And maybe we can turn this on. Yes.
Oh, it's on.
So it's called Pactio, and Pactio in Latin means pact. And the idea is to try to create an alternative business model for high-quality journalism. The problem with the business model of journalism is that 10, 15 years from now, there's probably going to be only room for a very small number of publications, such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, BBC, etc. But if we look back, there have been, in the past 15 years, 600 newspapers that shut down in the US alone. So in this world where the number of publications is shrinking, can we find another way than having to create yet another publication, knowing that the business model isn't really there? And so with Pactio, the idea is to create a platform where each individual journalist can start a pact, can enter a pact with his or her own audience, so that people can directly subscribe to, although I don't like the verb subscribing, but it gives you the idea, people can directly subscribe to the work of an individual reporter. So that as an individual reporter, you don't need to ask permission to anybody. You don't need to be hired by a news organization. You come to Pactio, as long as you are a respected, trustworthy journalist, you can start a pact with your audience. And people can pay on an ongoing basis $3 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, depending on what's your pricing tier. We are going to offer to those reporters a professional liability insurance. We're going to offer marketing. We're going to offer editorial services. We're going to offer, of course, a payment and transaction fees, all of that keeping 30% and giving 70% back to the journalists. So this is a brand new model that we are announcing today in Perugia, and that it's, again, yet another, thank you very much.
Big announcement, all right.
And it's going to be live with the first journalists in just a few weeks.
Nice.
And if you are a freelance reporter, of course, who's interested in using Pactio, and you are based in the US, or you are talking mainly to a US audience, please come and see me after the panel. We are also recruiting an editor, and I'll be glad to talk to you as well on that front. So that's all about my personal background. Now, I would love to get back to Jim.
I gotta say, don't discount the thing you built and sold to Plex. I'm a Plex user, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's here on this system everywhere is just awesome. So.
Yeah, so Plex is a very nice app that up until now it was all about personal media collections, but now there's also news. So it's kind of nice. So Jim, I would love to get your sense. So how long have you been living in the Bay Area?
We moved there 20 years ago when we launched a cable network called ZDTV that became Tech TV. So we moved from the East Coast.
Right. So tell me about how that place has changed in like 20 years.
The traffic is a lot worse.
Okay.
But I will also say that Silicon Valley, when I moved there and I covered technology, the heart of Silicon Valley were people who were making chips and technology and computers and PCs and routers and the underpinnings of the internet. And it was all based, so the Bay Area, if you're familiar with the geography of it, it's a peninsula. And at the bottom of the peninsula is San Jose, this town San Jose. Silicon Valley is San Jose. And that is where everybody was. There were these low buildings and people were building chips and microcode and all this stuff that was very hardware intensive. Over the last 20 years, it's become much more software and social intensive and web and internet intensive. And actually the heart of Silicon Valley has moved from down south, where San Jose is, up to San Francisco. And so you see most of the innovation happening, although it's Google and Facebook, but most of what people think of and where all the innovators are now is more in the San Francisco area than down in Silicon Valley. And interestingly, on the venture capital side, all of the investors were all on this place called Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park, which is right near Stanford, which is further down the valley. It's about 35 miles south of San Francisco. Over the last 10 years, all of them started slowly creeping up and putting little offices in San Francisco and then bigger offices in San Francisco. Unfortunately, it just made the traffic worse because you know what choke points are, right? It's a peninsula and everybody starts driving up to the top. So yeah, I work out of my house now.
In Pacifica, right?
Yeah, on the beach in Pacifica.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
So, and Jim, can you talk a little bit about where you see like innovation from the Valley being today, and what would be your advice for like a first-time entrepreneur who wants to shake up a little bit how media works?
Sure, and I think if you think about media hubs in the US and around the world, but I'll do US because I have a lot more experience there. You know, if you wanted to do media 10 or 15 years ago, you go to New York, right? You'd want to go work in a magazine or work in television. If you want to do entertainment, you would go to Hollywood. I went to San Francisco. And sort of that, but if you think about media now as the intersection of technology and content, which you have to, because you cannot divorce content and media from the technology that underpins it, that presents it, that puts it in front of people. So the understanding of technology and media bound together is super important. And that's why I think the Bay Area is such a hotbed for people that understand technology first. It's not as much of a media town, but more and more it's becoming that way. So you get this place where everybody who wants to do a technology startup, wants to do something social, build a platform, not everybody, but there is such a critical mass there that you walk down there, and if there's something you want to build, and I'd be interested in your experience because you went there to build a company, you want to find a smart co-founder. So let's say you want to build something and you're great on media, you've got a great vision, technology and code is not your thing. You can find a co-founder and somebody to build something with you there. But the other thing I'll say is that was sort of the dream, and it's been like that. And it still is that way, but it's gotten more expensive, it's gotten more crowded, it's gotten, there's just too much there that now we're seeing a little bit of a spread out of diaspora where people are actually moving to many different places to do that same thing. So, you know, Adriano and I helped him out a little bit on his first startup. he had local people. He had a great team locally, and actually he moved a couple of people in, I think, from around the world. But you had a great team off here, in the outskirts of Europe. And so you can, now the fact that technology is everywhere and networks are everywhere and the speeds are fast enough, and we have all these tools like Slack and other things, you can actually build a distributed team and do it really well.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, when I first got into the Valley about 7 years ago, most investors would still stick to that idea of your team has to be local, co-founders have to be local, I want to be able to come to board meetings.
I want to reach out and touch you at midnight to make sure you're working.
I remember one investor telling me, I want to be able to bike to board meetings. So that's how, she was from Palo Alto, so it was basically like Menlo Park, Palo Alto, Stanford, that's it. San Francisco was too late, too far away. So I think that nowadays the mindset is shifting. There are a lot of people who are still very much conservative on that, but there are amazing companies that have become behemoths, honestly, of the media world that are outside of Silicon Valley and frankly outside of the US. I mean, think about Spotify, for instance, right? Even Skype, of course, it got bought, but it started outside of the US. So I think that this is a great opportunity right now today, also because the mindset and all of the teaching about customer development and lean startups, all of that is much more accessible.
Right? There is one other thing. Oh, by the way, go ahead.
No.
I was just gonna, what you do get in Silicon Valley still is because Facebook is there and Google is there and these large companies are there and people work there for 4 or 5, 6 years. There's this thing where you get when you go to a company, a small startup, you get shares, and if it grows, you get vested over 4 or 5 years. And as companies get bigger, Google and Facebook and others, they get so big and people make a lot of money and they're like FUIV is a common acronym, which is FU, I've invested, and then they leave and start other things. So there is still that sense. But, what's you have a sense of what it's like there because you live in the center of it.
Yeah, and I guess this is going to be my take on this whole thing. And I told you guys, I've been doing a lot. I'm still journalist here. So, and one of the things that I sort of observed about entrepreneurship is by just being there is that, most of the entrepreneurs, unfortunately, and that's the research is telling us, are people like us, white dudes, unfortunately. I mean, this is sort of like a bad news, white dudes that are, that they can go without a salary. Unfortunately, there are 3 characteristics. They are white dudes, they can go without a salary, and they have a network, sort of like access to capital. These are the 3 sort of like characteristics of successful entrepreneurs. So that's bad news, right? Like we're not, if you're not born as white male, right? Your chances are lower. But there are things that you can change. And that's the networking part. And I really believe in the power of, by sort of expanding your network, being in an environment like this, you can actually get that chance and convert, convert from being someone who's underrepresented entrepreneur, you don't have the right color, you don't have the right sort of access, you actually recreate access. And one of the things that we teach actually at Stanford, networking is really, really big, and that's a lesson that I learned because when I went to Silicon Valley, as a journalist, I didn't know anyone over there. And then within a year or so, I ran one of the most successful Kickstarters and had 2,000 people chipping in for my project. And the way how I did that, as a immigrant over there, is someone who's 0 chances, right? You don't know people over there, was basically through expanding and creating networks.
And the nice thing, the nice thing about the culture in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, in many ways, is it. And I've worked a bunch in LA, although I've never moved there. As LA is very much of a I rise and you fall, right? I'm going to do my thing, and if I'm doing good, that means you've got to do less good. In the Bay Area, it's more of it's a rising tide, and everybody kind of works together. Not everybody, but there is that collaborative thing. People come to the Bay Area, what do I do? How do I meet people? I'd be interested to see how you did it. But I tell people, go to Meetup. Yeah. Meetup.com. There are meetups every single day on every single topic you would imagine in the Bay Area from, and I was in the video space, so there's a video technology meetup that happens once a month that's full of fascinating people. There is a video marketing meetup, and there's just, and so people get together and share ideas, and those of us who've done some stuff, we go talk at them, and we go because we want to meet people as well. And by the way, I want to push at a little something you said.
I know.
Because we have, and I worked at the seed fund, and for 3 years I had to drop out when I sold to Viacom because it was a conflict of interest. But we were very, very focused on not just investing in white males, and so we have a number of, and I'm like high percentage
social
of
starts, right?
social starts. High percentage of female CEOs are amazing. High percentage of CEOs of color who are amazing, and so it is true that it has been an old boys club, and there still is some of that in the Valley and around the world. But it's changing, thank God. And we've seen it, and we profited from it at Social Starts.
No, I think things like this can change, that's what I believe.
So, Djordje, you want to talk a little bit about the fellowship and some of the projects that you are supporting?
Yeah, so
in terms of innovative.
just to add to this, like I really, and something that we talked about like in the beginning in our introduction, and I really think that, it's probably like, it's a part of our nature. Journalists really make good entrepreneurs. We talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like, the way how you started, your thing when you were a kid, like, here in Italy. I mean, there are seriously stuff that we do in journalism that are connected with entrepreneurship. So, like being a great researcher, that's a skill of a great entrepreneur, right? Being a person who knows how to network, journalists are great networkers.
Great storytellers.
Right, great storytellers, exactly. Like,
And you got to tell a good story when you go pitch a venture capitalist. You got to have a good story.
Yes.
Another thing is sort of like when we think about our sources, you guys know when you interview someone, you need to empathize. Like you need to go into their shoes. You're trying to make sure that, empathy is such an important skill. I even call it skill, like, but at Stanford, at Stanford's design thinking school, which is sort of like one of the meccas of Silicon Valley also, right? The user-centric, they teach you how to empathize. And we journalists, we know how to empathize because we talk to people every day, I guess, unless, we're, so getting back to your question about Stanford, so fellows come, as you did, Adriano, they come with sort of like brilliant ideas, and every year we take 18 to 20 journalists. They come to Stanford to work on that problem. But what happens is really that throughout that process, we help them unpack the problem first. It is really about that time and the environment there where they can brainstorm, be in that collaborative space. They go to meetups. They go do wonderful things. They connect with tech entrepreneurs. They connect with amazing Stanford professors. They connect with our alumni, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things
Let's
that
make
they
some
do.
examples.
Yeah, so one of the things this is probably a good example, because I like to, when we think about innovation is like a buzzword a lot, and we're trying to innovate something. Yeah. And it's not only about technology, really. We had a fellow from 2015, Jeremy Hay, Spaceship Media. This is a good example of media entrepreneur who was like, okay, so this election thing is happening. When he was on a fellowship, he had been thinking about how do we engage communities that are having opposed views, and how do we connect people that are living in those echo chambers. So they came up with this wonderful idea that they could do storytelling projects where they would put very opposed communities together to talk for a while using Facebook. Okay, there's a little bit of technology, but like it's an unusual sort of like way to do it. And what they did, they put people from California that were voting for Hillary, right? And they put people from Alabama that were voting for Trump, and they talked to each other. And the group did an amazing journalism storytelling project, and which became such a wonderful success. Like they had like zillions of pickups, and suddenly we had news organizations interested for their model. They're expanding. But this is just an example.
Outlier.
Right. Just an example. Yeah, we can come to that example later on if you want to share more things. Outlier is another seriously public service journalism project. Sarah Alvarez, I'm looking at you, Tracy, yeah, one of your fellows. She'd been thinking how to help low-income communities in across U.S., and she came up with this wonderful idea to work in Detroit and basically provide rental and housing information to people when they need it, which means that she's using also messaging as a system to sort of like inform people, you know, when their landlord, for example, owes for taxes, you know, and there's a real danger, or they are close to falling default, or they're, you know, they owe for taxes they don't know, basically. So based on just on that simple thing, she's still like a one-man show. You know, she does regular traditional reporting beyond that, but it was an amazing effort for her to connect with a community in Detroit and sort of like use housing data in an individual way, basically sending you information directly. So Outlier Media. Yeah.
Great.
Hey, can I? Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I just want to. Sorry, that one of the things that you said that journalists make great entrepreneurs.
Right.
Something to think about is if you are, you know, we're talking a little bit about venture capital. If you are going out to start a company and looking to raise money, journalists also surprisingly make great venture capitalists.
Oh, really?
And there are a number of them out there. So MJ Siegler, Jason Calacanis, who did Silicon Valley Reporter and sold it to AOL and is now one of the top angel investors in the world. So if you're going to go raise money, look around at venture capitalists who are ex-journalists, because you got an in with them, right?
Yeah,
So
totally.
I just thought of that little tip. I wanted to say it before I forgot it.
That's a great point.
So I would love to get
Yeah.
a show of hands for people who would like to ask a question or
Yeah.
say something or take part. Just raise your hand now.
Got one over there.
Just
Anybody
want
have
to-
a mic?
ju-
Or
yes,
wanna
but
pitch?
everybody else, if there's any other, I want to understand how many questions there are going to
Yeah.
be. Just one,
Nope, two,
two,
Okay.
3,
4.
4.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's start.
Now we got a mic. The mic's running over.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Go ahead. There we go. Sorry.
All right.
Hi, what's your name?
Hi, my name is Simon Galperin. I do two things. One is I work for Ground Source with Andrew Haig right behind me, who was a JSK fellow previously.
Yeah.
I'm also a founder of a nonprofit organization called the Community Information Cooperative. My question is, you just gave two great examples of additive entrepreneurs, people who are not extracting from communities, but adding real value to them. So, and feel free to push back on this, but venture capital has this bad rap, right? And capital has this bad rap about being extractive and looking to make a profit rather than to add something to a community. So my question is, how does the investing community and the entrepreneurial community consider the negative externalities of their businesses and also justify the negative externality of their businesses?
Jimmy,
You want to take that?
Yeah, look, my first boss in media, the publisher of a magazine where I came in to run reviews, used to have a saying. He said, imagine for a minute we're in business to make money. And, you know, that, and look, I'm going to stick up for venture capital a little bit because what you have to think about when you talk about it is these guys are, other people are giving them money to make them money. So there is that, if they don't do that, they will not be in business, then they will not be able to fund the next group of companies that are there. Now, with that said, there are a number of funds that have theses that that they come up with that are designed to make money, but do it in a particular way. So there are funds that are focused only on women entrepreneurs. There are funds that are focused on social entrepreneurship. There are funds that are focused on many different things. But remember that every one of them is designed because their LPs are giving, the LP is a limited partner. So the way a venture capital works is you got people with a lot of money, and you got a venture capitalist like, if you give me a lot of money, a lot of your money, I will turn into a lot more money. That's kind of the promise. So if there are other ways, though, to raise capital that are emerging that don't necessarily require that you go to venture capitalists. There are good venture capitalists out there. I've had them working with me. You know, one is to bootstrap it. The other is Kickstarter, for example.
Right.
Kickstarter and Indiegogo and crowdfunding are ways to get you so that you can launch and start building something. There are new models emerging, which I wouldn't recommend that you do right now until some of the stuff sorts out, but around cryptocurrency. And there are other ways to build this out. And there are nonprofits that you can work with. But understand that, and again, I'm going to stick up for venture capital a little bit, but it is basically in the business of making money for people who give them money.
Next question.
Sorry, I know you're smiling.
Yeah,
I don't know if I really
no,
answered your
it's-
question, but I want to be clear and frank.
Externality question, right? Like,
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to harp on this because
That's okay.
we need to answer this question. It is vital for our society to flourish, right? No offense to your new product, but that is just the Uberization of journalism, right? And that is a trend, that is a downhill trend that is not good for our economy and our society, and just saying, hey, listen, market concentration is going to happen, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and then Facebook and Google and Amazon are going to be the only companies that exist, and just throwing our hands up and saying that's the way it's going to be is leading us down a dark and dangerous hole.
Well, I would like to push back on not the Uberization of journalism, because it's not that at all. Just because like the math is not the same, and because the power that Uber has and the access to resources they have is just not the same. But I would like to push back on the notion that venture capital has to be extractive. And that notion, that adjective you're using is based upon the fact that it is a zero-sum game. I don't think it is a zero-sum game. I think that when you are creating new things that didn't exist before, they can do good, they can do bad, just because humans do good and humans do bad. Now, is it the only way, I think that was Jim's point, to fund innovative projects, innovative companies? Hell no. In Berkeley, there was just announced, you guys probably heard, a direct public offering, I think they called it. Jim mentioned cryptos. There's no profit. There is a boom of non-profit media operations. When it comes to us, like humbly and with a lot of energy and with a lot of love for journalism, all we are saying at Pactio is that we need a way to cover the forgotten stories that can also be sustainable economically. We definitely see a big economical opportunity in local journalism, because there are a lot of newspapers that have shut down. There is still a big need for local journalism, and we need to create a model that is profitable, that is sustainable, that can make money to journalists. I mean, look, in our model, we're going to give back 70% to the journalists. How much, I don't have the numbers, but I'm pretty sure if you work for the New York Times, you're not getting 70% of what you create in terms of the revenue back in your paycheck. It's probably like 20% or maybe even less. But I would love to continue that conversation, because I have so much love and so much passion for what we're going to build and for journalism as a whole that I really care about.
And just a little addition to this, like, I really don't think that VC is something that we should be interested in, like, especially people in journalism. There's so many different ways to sponsor your work. Some research is telling that basically 40% of all the entrepreneurship projects are being funded by friends and families, actually. I mean, that's been a really underestimated source of funding. You know, we get a lot of this, like fellows come to Stanford and they're like, oh, we're going to just find this next VC. You know, this is not happening with journalism, right?
Jim.
Yeah, I have two things. One, know the devil you're getting into bed with. Yeah. And so one of the companies that we invested in is called The Hustle. And it's a great company. It's actually an email newsletter that goes out every day. And they're covering stuff, but they're actually now doing their own journalism as well. They're email-based and they have a conference, but they are an amazingly cool company. So it is stuff is being, and when you're talking about Amazon and Google and those guys getting, owning everything, there's cycles. And I've lived through these cycles back like 20, 25, 30 years ago when I was just getting started. IBM and Microsoft were the devils. When was the last time you worried about IBM? Microsoft too. So the cycles are moving faster and faster. And I predict in 15 years, there will be companies that, we'll be looking at Google and Facebook and being like, those old companies. There'll be new ones we can't even think about that are rising up. And I challenge you, build one.
Okay.
I saw a little show of hands in the back as well before our friends over here. No? Yes, I think, yes.
Thank you. My name is Djordje from Germany, and actually my co-founder is sitting right here. We started a media startup called Fail Better Media, quite prophetically it turned out. So, so we know about the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur.
Right.
And I'm interested in this whole investment thing. Of course, by now we have learned that traditionally, the microphone is not working very well.
No, it sounds
not
good. We hear you.
It's good.
It is, it
Good.
is.
We can hear you.
that the VC is not really so hot on journalism because the scalability is just not there.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have like all these non-profits, and you can go to a grant and to a foundation. And a lot of projects that are being funded don't really have a business model. They're nice to look at, but they don't really make any money. And I was wondering, isn't there some kind of middle ground investment-wise? I mean, when you do this investment on the stock markets, you can go for the more risky or the more conservative route, or you can buy federal bonds or something. Is there, in your experience, an investment market for investors who are interested more in staying in it for the long run, not really huge scalability, not really huge profit margin, but a slow development, a healthy development of community, all these things that need time to build, but not only make money, but also do a service to society?
This sounds like impact.
So there's
Right.
there is a group of investors. I think they're called tugboat investors. I can't remember, that are very involved in investing long term, and they don't take a piece of the company. They take a piece of the profits, and that they realize people want to build companies to
How is it called?
last. I think is it tugboat.
Tugboat.
It's something like I'm gonna think of it, but there is
TUD?
what
TUD?
tug as in tug,
Ah,
like
tug,
a boat,
tug.
a tugboat.
Tugboat.
And it's it is an interesting trend. I'm not sure how strong a trend it is. So that's something to think about. The other thing I think is really interesting for you guys, which we talked about as well when we were doing our pre-discussion, is timing. When you do anything, timing is everything. You guys got your timing down. That's pretty good. So you could have the right thing too early, like I did with an online video startup. You get your timing right, and that's super important too. Did you find? Yeah, Tugboat Ventures,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's also, just to add a little bit, there's also a group of investors around sort of impact investment idea. So that's what you're talking about. There are a bunch of groups that are thinking about, investing in things, but not thinking about like getting any sort of financial return. It's more sort of social impact return.
So we
that'll
have 10 minutes left for 5 questions. So
All right,
or
rapid fire.
Maybe
Rapid fire.
6. So what I'm gonna do, it's a little bit not orthodox, is to have everybody speaking up, because this is a conversation. We don't have to talk all the time.
Yeah,
okay?
totally.
And then at the end, we're gonna say something. Okay.
Right.
So please.
Is this thing on? Hi. My name is Yasser. Until recently, I was the head of digital video at Al Jazeera English. I just left a few months ago. Have dreams of being a startup myself. But one thing that makes me jealous about people who come from America, and I'm Canadian, is how much money you guys have available to yourselves, and how much opportunity you guys have created within the country. Now, I come from a broadcaster that dealt almost exclusively with the global South. What is available in terms of support, both in terms of money and funding and whatnot? What do you know, or what can you tell us? And I'd say, 3/4 of the people in this room are not from America and probably never will be. What do we have as in terms of support to start new media companies that how can we tap into that?
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention 2 quick things. I'm Tracy with All Digitocracy, a 2016 Knight Fellow. And I also work with the Democracy Fund. So a couple of things. Stanford has an incredible business school there. You might have heard about it. And they have a great program for social entrepreneurship. And you can tap into that. And there's another thing, and I hope that Djordje talks about it a little bit, Matter VC and the relationship that Matter VC has with Knight Foundation, and those are, again, social venture capitalists. The thing that kind of bothered me about this panel, I want to be honest with you, is that there are no women and there are no people of color. And I think you're paying a really road. I am from this country.
But a lot of
And
immigrants.
it's very difficult for people of color, founders of color, to access funding. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, but I think we got to be a little bit more honest about that.
Thank you.
So I think here, and then.
Hello, my name is Sausen, and I work for a media development organization. And as you can see, I'm not a white dude.
Oh, cool.
I work with journalists mainly in conflict zone in the Middle East and North Africa and in difficult places. And I work with plenty of great entrepreneurs, journalists that are passionate about telling the story of their communities in the most neglected and difficult area. So I'm very, I like that you have all this opportunity in the Silicon Valley, Stansted, but I find it a bit like elitist. Like how many of our people, I mean people who live in poor country or in country where there are conflict and who never have access to all what you have in terms of funding, in terms of training, etc. So how can you make sure that also you connect with people that are outside your comfort zone where you are, and how can you empower them and make sure that also you get to connect with them, with people who never have the opportunity that you have, and how I have a civil society approach, like I want to democratize, I want to get to everyone. How do you do that?
So I would love.
Let's
yeah,
get the
okay.
last, I think, over
We'll
there.
talk. Let's talk after this session.
And this
I would
is the
love
last
to talk
one.
to you about this.
In the same way, sorry for my English. I am from Uruguay. I think the only business model of the journalism is nearly of the people. In our country, the journalists are near the powerful people. And then we have problem, and we remember the people, but we are functionally to the powerful people. If we will be future, we must understand this. We are the people, not are the powerful persons. Sorry for the English.
No worries.
Okay,
We're
so
all- yeah.
last one,
English is not
and then we're all going to try to answer
Right.
to all of those. I have a few notes here. And
In terms of being a startup, in terms of starting up a company and being an entrepreneur, do you think that someone of color, of the LGBT community, or someone who's not American who's trying to have a startup in the US, do you think they're at a disadvantage? And do you have any advice for someone who is an entrepreneur just starting out?
okay, cool. Thank you very much. So, Jim, you want to start? With,
Yeah, on the the global side, in part, we're here, but there are a couple of firms, and there are a bunch of them. I don't know enough of them, but I'll give you a couple of quick names of people that are looking around the world for things. There's one called 500 Startups that is, although recently in a little bit of a scandal, they are very global and they have funds around the world, and they continue to do that around the world. And so, and even I mentioned Jason Calacanis from Launch, and he does his incubator, and he pulls people in from all over the world for his incubator in the U.S. So it's look, it's not a good story.
Why not? Y
Y C,
Combinator
Y
is also
Combinator is the other one.
very open to foreign companies.
So things are changing, not as fast as we want to, but they are changing. And look, I think we're working to try and some of us are working to try and make that better. So I don't have good answers, but at least I can say it's not as bad as it was, and hopefully it'll get a lot better. So.
Yeah. So we are also internationally focused. So I didn't want to. Can you put a bell? Yeah. So this is another example that I wanted to share with you guys, but it was we're thinking about the time. This is a Russian startup basically in the area. So Elizaveta Osetinskaya, who was our fellow last year, she sort of came to Stanford with problem like how do we report on Russia, because she was actually fired after the Panama Papers scandal and everything, and she came up with this wonderful idea, very simple solution. It's not like the most innovative thing, but she started a newsletter and basically messaging service, and right now they have like 40,000 subscribers. People are hungry for real news from Russia, and she's focusing business people mostly, and they already did several investigations that are moving both DC and Moscow together. So,
Yeah.
I mean, just like making the point about international, so there are resources, it's possible. And anyone really, because we need to close this panel down, and there's gonna be Google reception events, so
It's
we're gonna move there.
Are we sure it's until 7 p.m. or
Right.
7:30? 7 p.m., no? Yeah, 7 p.m., okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna be sticking around a little bit here.
Yes.
Because
And
they
I'm
have to shut all
really-
this down. The AV
I-
guys want to go home.
I'm
So don't
really
blame
happy to talk to anyone
Yeah,
who's
and-
interested to apply to our fellowship, and I'm here until Sunday, so you can find me. Just look my Twitter handle. I'm happy really to talk to you, especially with you. Your question is something that I really care about.
So,
Well, and I'll say on your side, same thing. When we're done, I've got a bunch of ideas for you, but let's talk about it afterwards. Or anybody wants
So it's-
thoughts on how to do that in terms of the startup? Go ahead. Sorry.
So as for me, the only thing I wanted to say is, so there has been a lot of talk about Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world. So I wanted to share with you this article that I haven't read because I am not a subscriber, but everybody's talking about, sorry,
Why you're not subscribed?
You can get Wall Street Journal stories
can
if you're
get-
not a subscriber. There are ways.
sorry, Rupert
Yeah,
Murdoch.
Not sorry.
But this story, I've seen it tweeted in the past few days. It's about Asian venture capital firms basically catching up with the US. So there's a lot of investment, venture capital outside of Silicon Valley that is happening as well. First thing. Second thing, somebody mentioned that we have access to capital in the Valley that is unprecedented. So when a lot of people sometimes ask me, so how hard it is to raise money in the Valley? I always say that it's extremely hard to get the money, but to have access to the people who have the money is pretty easy. And when you look at the stats, there's 1 out of 300 entrepreneurs who pitches to investors who ends up being funded. So 1 out of 300, which means that it's not easy to get the money, but yes, you can pitch. There are all different places. I would say it's a pretty meritocratic place when it comes to the mindset of saying anybody can make it. When you look at the most successful CEOs of the most successful companies, I think it's like 40% of them that were born outside of the US. Now, when it comes to women, I really think there is a big problem in the Valley. Like, as a matter of fact, the percentage of women VCs in the past 10 years has gone down instead of going up. And guess what? It's gone down, I think, from 9% to 7%, which is really like a scandal. I was listening to like an amazing podcast the other day, and that was really striking. Okay, so a lot to talk about, a lot to
a lot
build.
of questions.
I'm sorry, we're out of time, but
Yeah.
please come
We'll
and
be
see
right
us.
out
Please,
there.
we'll.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Thank you. It's working? Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to seize the opportunity to say to everyone that we've launched a prize next year. It's the second year this year, and it's with the Harvard Newman Foundation, and it's to reward, help, boost innovative project in the media or journalistic field. So if you want more info, I'll be waiting outside.
Awesome.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
That's the one, yeah.
Okay, and I would just say that if everybody did like you, to just go ahead and
pick.
grab the voice,
Yeah.
that's how girls can make it.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, cool.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
guys. Thank you.